We had left off with the new new temple in Brazil with the evangelical preacher in the talus and the Ark of the Covenant being brought through the hall. And we talked a little bit about the cinematic Lost Ark of Raiders of the Lost Ark, here reconstructed by the magicians of cinema. And you, in fact, can own your own version of it. It is for sale, including the clothes of the high priest. But people wonder where the Lost Ark where the Ark actually is, if it's lost. I spent some time in the Vatican. I asked the Pope if the Ark and the menorah are in the Vatican somewhere, hidden in the basement, and he said, "Who am I to judge?" So I'm not sure what that means, but apparently it's something he says often until he judges. And there is a theory that the Lost Ark, the real Lost Ark, is in Ethiopia. Tudor Parfit wrote a book. Many other people have this is an audio version. Many other people have written on it. The story is that King Solomon, when the Queen of Sheba came to visit him, here's the Queen of Sheba, had a son with the Queen of Sheba named Melanik, who became the first emperor of Ethiopia. And this is way back when the Ethiopians were Jewish, right? They since became one of the earliest Christian churches in the world. And Melanik brought for safekeeping, brought the Ark of the Covenant in the form of something that looks like a small suitcase or a box, called a tabot. So a tabot in Ethiopian is the equivalent of teva. Teva is an interesting word. It means ark, as in Noah's Ark. It means a container. But teva is never used in Jewish culture to mean the Ark of the Covenant. That's always called Aron HaBrit. Teva means the synagogue ark, for instance. So whatever they had or have in Ethiopia, it's not the Ark of the Covenant, but clearly there's some religious object that's a flat, relatively small object that is borne on the head and is housed in Gondar province, which interestingly is a place where there are a lot of Ethiopian Jews came from there, in this church, which is called St. Mary's. Here is the interior, and you can see it's a round church. This is the Holy of Holies, in which the tabot, or multiple tabots, so it's unclear which of these things is supposed to be the Ark of the Covenant, if any, is kept. It's a place of great holiness, as you can see, and the shrine has its own keeper. And on special occasions, the tabot is brought out. But as I say, there's not just one, there are several. They're borne on the head. Are they supposed to represent, some people say they're supposed to represent the tablets of the covenant. We don't know what they are. We don't know what's in them. It's not discussed. But interestingly, some of these objects were brought from Ethiopia out into the Ethiopian diaspora. And relatively recently, one was restored to an Ethiopian church in London. And here is, you know what, I have to do a new share here because I need to optimize it for video clip. Okay, here we go. I'll show you the ceremony of its reception. A little bit of it. Oops, sorry. That's too little. I need the controls. It's not, doesn't seem to be working. 1 second. Here we go. Pick the object. and it goes back in the Holy of Holies. So what that object is, we don't know. They are there are some in the British Museum. They seem to be the ones in the British Museum are slabs of wood, right? There is a theory that there is one true one, and these are reproductions. But as I say, it's kind of shrouded in mystery and is only peripherally, obviously, related to the Ark as a casket in which various artifacts important to the Israelites were put. But in Israel, on the left and the right, there's been a reappropriation of both temple and Ark symbolism. There is an institute in Israel now for going on almost 40 years called the Temple Institute, which is dedicated to bringing the Holy Temple to life every day, reconstructing in dubious taste, I would say, the various artifacts in the temple for use in a future third temple, as we'll discuss, and marketing, including, little model of the Ark of the Covenant, formed of balsa wood, just like you can make a model dinosaur, etc. That's the right, politically. These are people who are politically on the side of settlements, right? These are people who are politically on the side of the entirety of the land of Israel, all of that. And the temple is a very important part of their consciousness. And these are the people who go up and attempt to pray on the Temple Mount. And they claim that they know where the Ark of the Covenant is hidden, that Rabbi Shlomo Goren, who was the first military chaplain, rabbi of the army in Israel, saw it with his own eyes, and it will be restored when the temple is built. Be that as it may, there's also another group of people who claim the inheritance of the Ark. This is an old woodcut of Bezalel and Oliav making the implements of the tabernacle. And here you see the Ark with the tablet of the commandments and the jar of the manna. And the name of Bezalel was appropriated as the name of Israel's first and premier art school, Bezalel, you might have heard, in Jerusalem. And the seal of Bezalel has the Ark of the Covenant, as you see on it, designed by Boris Schatz, who was one of their earliest teachers of art. Bezalel has always been associated with more left-wing politics, right? But in the early days of Bezalel, there were any number of artworks that in the 20s and 30s, actually before statehood, that incorporated the Ark of the Covenant in various ways. So here's a little silver book cover that has the tablets of the commandments with wings above them, evoking the cherubs on the Ark. This design for, I think, probably a Torah breastplate that has winged lions to evoke the cherubs, or this design for a tapestry that has actual cherubs to evoke the cherubs with the symbols of the tribes. A Bezalel embroidery, right, with the Ark of the Covenant on it. So the last thing I want to say about the Ark of the Covenant is that it's quite interesting to me that when the Ark is described in the rabbinic literature, the rabbis tell us something crucial about the kruvim, these angelic figures on the Ark. Something you no doubt did not learn in Sunday school, and that is this: so long as Israel did the will of its parent in heaven, the kruvim were locked in embrace, in a sexual embrace, quote, the way a man lies with a woman. I guess we have to say in a heteronormative sexual embrace, right? The rabbis put it the way a man lies with a woman, right? So that God's presence is found manifest not in the tablets and not in the Ark and not in the lattice on the cover of the Ark and not in the kruvim themselves, but only in the empty space between the outstretched wings of these mysterious beings. And that the kruvim themselves were united in a sexual embrace are very, very important ideas. And interestingly, the metaphor that's chosen for the love of God for Israel, should I say interestingly? Yes, it's interesting because, there is a lot of tamping down on the idea of sexuality among sort of discussion of it in public among more observant Jews. But it's also it's a very important part of Jewish thought in terms of metaphors for divine love. And the ark, the cherubs on the ark, at a time of divine favor, of course, faced each other, as it says in the Bible. But the rabbis tell us, interestingly, that the cherubs on the ark, at a time of divine disfavor, this is from the Zohar, important mystical text, they faced away from each other, right? Now, what's interesting to me is that the day that the temple was destroyed and the Babylonians took the Ark of the Covenant out into the street in a cage, it said in rabbinic literature, that they pointed to the cherubs that were locked in a sexual embrace, unlike this model, right? And they said, "Behold, your gods, O Israel, a pornographic statue. You should be so ashamed." But nobody was ashamed, and they weren't ashamed because the cherubs were embracing. Imagine it. It was the darkest, deepest, darkest time of Jewish history up to that point. The city had been besieged and destroyed. The temple had been destroyed. The people were going into exile in Babylonia, and they dragged the ark, which nobody ever saw, except, as we said, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest saw it, right? And on one other occasion, I'll describe for you in a second, the ark was seen, but it was rarely viewed. They dragged it out into the street, and they said, "Look at this pornographic object." People were happy. Why? Because the cherubs were embracing. They weren't, they weren't turning away from each other. So even in that darkest time, the cherubs turned toward each other, just like we need to turn toward each other in order for God to turn to us. So really the greatest manifestation, I would say, of the meaning of the ark is that the ark is about, is profoundly about connection and togetherness and facing each other. And in our connection, that's where the voice of God speaks. So today I want to talk about the rest of the temple, what remains from it. You can see fragments of the temple if you know where to look for them. I do want to talk about an object that, what happened? Sorry. An object that came to me when I worked for Sotheby's Judaica department. There was a guy, an archaeologist named Vendel Jones. He was an evangelical Christian, and he modeled himself on Indiana Jones. He wore a leather hat. He carried a bullwhip. He even carried a bullwhip in Sotheby's in New York, where I was working, when he came to see me, and he told me with his heavy Southern accent, he said, "I found something very important. I found the Urim and Tumim." So what were the Urim and Tumim? The Urim veTumim were very important objects. They were the high priest's breastplate. In the temple, the high priest wore a breastplate on his chest, which had these stones in it. And when the high priest would consult with God, the stones, which had the letters of all the names of the tribes of Israel on them, would light up and reveal the answer to the question. And the reason for which, or the manner in which they lit up, was because inside the breastplate there was something called the Urim veTumim. We don't know what they were. They were some kind of oracle of some sort, some kind of animating force, some kind of battery, right? Whatever they were, they communicated to God. Nobody ever saw them. And so it's interesting, if you're an archaeologist and you want to bring me an object, to say that it's the Urim veTumim. And he brought this object. And I looked at it, and it seemed to me to be a elongated pomegranate shape. It was sort of broken. It had a space for a rod to fit into it. And in archaic Hebrew, around the base here, the body of the fruit, it said the following, right? It said, Kadosh Lebeit, and then cut off, right? Holy to the house of, and the missing word is the name of God, right? So I was very curious about it, and I conjectured that in the Book of Chronicles, when the temple is described, it said that the priests had ivory staves, thin ivory staves that had pomegranates on top. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. This could be a pomegranate consecrated to the house of God, meaning to the temple. And it couldn't be the Urim Thummim because ivory is something that's susceptible to impurity, and the high priest would not have worn it a bone in his breastplate, right? So I asked Vendel Jones, to put it up for auction at Sotheby's. And he said, thank you very much, and took my evaluation and went and sold it privately to a collector in Switzerland who subsequently sold it to the Israel Museum. Now, it was in the Israel Museum for some time, exactly with that description, as the only remaining fragment of Solomon's temple, except it seems it wasn't. And that's the cautionary tale. Very, very often, there's claims of archaeologists sifting through the rubble on the Temple Mount, which increasingly is a kind of a contentious practice. Not the practice is contentious, but it comes on the heels of attempts of the Waqf, that is the authority based in Jordan that has jurisdiction over the Temple Mount. There's more and more of an attempt to erase ancient Jewish presence. So many things are just thrown in the garbage or reduced to rubble. And there's a group of archaeologists who go and sift through the rubble and find things. And these things are found very frequently, actually, fragments of both temples, and they are publicized generally at the time of some Jewish holiday. So if they find a coin from the Maccabees, right, they'll publicize, the Israeli Antiquities Authority will publish it around Hanukkah time, to sort of get people to understand that the Temple Mount is and always was a Jewish site, that one can't wish away Jewish presence on the Temple Mount. After all, as we'll see, one of the Arabic names for the Temple Mount complex testifies to the presence of the Jewish temples there. But there also is an opportunity for opportunists, and I wouldn't say that Vendel Jones invented this. He genuinely thought this was the Urim Thummim. Somebody had sold it to him. But somebody apparently created this ivory pomegranate, and according to most archaeologists today, it's not good, right? However, there are things that were found even 100 years ago that actually corroborate biblical accounts of things and are genuine, even with inscriptions, although it's rarer to have inscriptions. Look at this. This is called the Uzziah ossuary. So what happened is, when you, God forbid, died in Israelite antiquity, they take your body, wrap it in linen and oil and balsam and other spices, and put you on a shelf in a cave, because there's very poor soil in Jerusalem, very rocky, very few places to actually bury people. So you'd be put in a burial cave. And after a year, when your flesh had fallen off the bones and dissipated, or a year or so, they would take your bones and put it in what was called an ossuary, a bone box, a small box, and they put it on a shelf or in a niche in the cave, and then the larger shelves would be free for the next person to decompose upon, right? And often the bone box will have something scratched in a very primitive way into it that has the name of the person, or maybe the person's name of the person's parents. And we have lists of all these inscriptions, but the most impressive bone box is this very lovely carved one. This is the end of the box, right? This short end. And it says, what is that? Tafoy Uzziah Melech Yehuda Velal Miftach, which means here were taken in Aramaic the bones of Uzziyahu, the king of Judah, please do not open. And it is not for opening, right? Fascinating. This is a real object, right? So, for every few objects that turn out to be disappointing, we do have some very interesting finds. The temples were both built basically in the same general area on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. We'll talk about Mount Moriah and why in a second. Har HaMoriah means the mount, the place of seeing. It is currently known as the Temple Mount by Jews, and Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary by Muslims. And this is what it looks like today. It includes a part, an area where the temple stood, which is now covered by these domes here, including what's called the Kibbutz Sakra, the Dome of the Rock. And it also encompasses a large mosque called Al-Aqsa, which is here on the southern side. The original first Temple of Solomon probably had its Holy of Holies, or it seems had its Holy of Holies in the place where the Dome of the Rock is now. And the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque, but a monument. It covers a very important rock that we'll discuss. And the temple was oriented slightly differently. The temple was rebuilt after the Jews came back from exile in Babylonia. It had been destroyed, as I said. It was rebuilt, and then it was expanded in the Herodian period, in the late Roman period. And what we see here is the Herodian platform. Muslims added trees. It was forbidden to plant trees on the Temple Mount by Jews, but because a mosque and a monument are a place where a lot of people gather and maybe spend the day outside exposed, as opposed to there were colonnades and other devices, as we'll see in the temple. So trees were planted to keep the area shaded. We'll be looking at this southern area and its excavations. Here, of course, on the left is the western area, including the western wall, which is the retaining wall of the mountain, as you know. On this side, the other retaining wall has an important gate called the Golden Gate. And here there are double and triple gates, which we will discuss. When the temple stood at this site, it looked like this. This is Michael Aviona's model, which was for years in the Holy Land Hotel in Jerusalem, in Beit Vagan, has been moved because it is a national treasure to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And you see the complex, which consists of a central building with various walls, a larger platform. This was Herod's expansion. A gate here. This is the southern side that we discussed. The western wall is here in the back. The temple building is this relatively small building. And then here are stoa and architraves. There's a basilica here where Al-Aqsa Mosque eventually is built. Just means a large hall divided into three with columns, other columns. If you wanted to keep shady, you would go in there. And then here, at the time of Herod, a large fortress built, which the Romans eventually occupied as a way of looking into the temple and making sure everything was kosher and that the Jews weren't using it as a basis for rebellion. A closer view of the actual temple building in the second temple. There are several different layers or levels of access. This outer court here and in the front, which you can't see, is called the court of the Gentiles. That is where anybody could go, Jew or non-Jew, who wanted to visit and to marvel at the temple. King Solomon's temple and King Herod's temple were both very, very beautiful buildings. We'll talk about what it meant to be beautiful in the ancient world. Then a gate here, and this courtyard, Then a fence called the soreg that we will discuss. It's a very special fence because we have remains from that fence. Inside here So this is the court of the Gentiles. Inside here is the court of the women. This is the place that Jewish men and women could go and mix together. Inside here is the court of the Israelites, meaning the Israelite men. That's where you'd enter to bring your sacrifice, and various outbuildings, one for the priests to eat their meals, one to store wood, one to store donations to the temple, etc., etc. Another set of gates called the Nicanor gates, and leading up to them, I'm sorry, this is the Nicanor gate on the inside. This is just the gate to the Azara. Leading up to them, a set of 15 steps on which the orchestra of the Levites, 400 piece orchestra and choir, would sing while the sacrifices were offered in the temple courtyard. On the inside here, only the priests could go. Into the building, only the priests. And in the back of the building, the holiest place, and that is where only the high priest went on the Day of Atonement. So a very graduated building with a very hierarchical structure that was socially determined and mediated. Just so you see, the modern Muslim platform on the Temple Mount is here. Solomon's Temple Mount extended to here. Already the Maccabees had extended the Temple Mount. Herod's Temple Mount is the whole place here. And the temple building was here. So the Muslim platform coincides with the temple building, particularly the Dome of the Rock does so. Here's a three-dimensional view you can see as well. And we'll talk about Robinson's Arch, etc., as we go ahead. The fortress, the expanded wall, the western wall here. The original platform wall is within, and it's filled in with silt and rock. The Temple Mount, the Ark sat on this bedrock, which we'll discuss. The Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, extended it. Herod extended it further, and the double and triple gates here. We will be looking at as we proceed. So, just for your interest, right? The way you see things today, right? You see these gigantic stones throughout the periphery, including in the western wall, but you see that some of them have been cut quite finely. These that are not cut finely are eroded, but they're part of the original walls. These have remained. Some massive blocks have fallen, and they are distinguished by the outer rim that indicates that this is Herodian stone. And there are places on the walls in which, as you can see, the remnants of what would have been tremendous arches can still be seen. And the arches held up stairways. And in this model, you can see what we have is just the remnants of this arch and another arch further along. But there was a whole system of stairways. There was a street in front of the temple in which there were shops. We found the remnants of those shops. And there were various ways in which you could enter the temple, depending on your status. Were you in mourning? Were you or bereaved, right? Were you in a state of purity? Were you going to use the mikveh, the ritual bath, before entering the temple, right? And this is the side gates with the steps on the southern side of the temple that, in fact, still remain. Right now, you can visit. Well, maybe not now because we're not going on this trip right now, but you can go and visit Israel, go visit Jerusalem, and actually be on the reconstructed steps that led up to the gates that are now blocked, the triple gate and the double gate of the temple. This is where people would go in and go out. There are other remnants. Here's another view of the steps. I don't know, some of you may, in fact, have been there. So there's quite actually a lot of the architecture, including these Herodian pilasters, like flat columns that are against the walls, that make it clear that it is a second, that part of the Second Temple. It is an ancient Jewish structure. And as I said, Muslims call the Temple Mount, the Haram as Sharif, the noble or beautiful sanctuary. But there's also another name for the Temple Mount that's not used very often now because of politics, but it's in the textual sources, which is Beit al-Maqdis. Beit al-Maqdis sounds like Bet Hamikdash. That is the house of that is sanctified, the holy house, right? So Arabs and Muslims do acknowledge in their writings and the ones who are not so politicized that they want to erase history. You know, I think there's a considerable number of Muslims who would have no problem with acknowledging that this was a Jewish space. They understand that their sources corroborate that. The Temple Mount is important in history, but it's important in mythic history too. You know, G.K. Chesterton said, "Our myths are the truest things we have." And if you were in the Kibbutz Sakra, you would see this rock. This is the most, it's the most important rock in Judaism, right? It is, in fact, according to some, the foundation stone of the world, right? The rabbis said an astounding thing in the Gemara. They said, the world began with the foundation stone, just as a fetus is formed beginning with the umbilicus in the womb, right? Pretty good for the 1st or 2nd century. And the importance of this stone was such that in rabbinic legend, it became the place that Adam and Eve, when expelled from Eden, and forgive the quality of some of these are put out by the Temple Institute, the people I told you were the Third Temple people. So some of them are not very clear, but this is Adam and Eve making their first sacrifice when expelled from Eden. Where did they do it? On the Temple Mount. When Noah emerged from the ark and made his first sacrifice, where did he do it? On the temple. I'm sorry, that's not, excuse me, that's wrong. When Cain and Abel made their sacrifices, where did they do it? On the Temple Mount. When Noah emerged from the ark, there's the animals, right? And made his first sacrifice in the new world, right? The newly revealed world, to thank God for his salvation. Where did he do it? On the Temple Mount. And then, of course, in the Bible, it testified that when Abraham was sacrificing Isaac, it was on the Temple Mount, on that stone. And when God told him through the angel to stop the sacrifice, Abraham had a vision, according to the rabbis, of the future temple. Right? When Jacob had his dream of the angels going up and down, what he really saw, according to the rabbis, was the priests in the temple going up and down on that spot, which would become Mount Moriah, right? Which is the spot Mount Moriah, which would become the site of the temple. And so when Jacob says this is none other than the gate of heaven, right? Shara Shamayim, right? And anoints the rock, that is the rock that will become the foundation stone in the temple. And of course, the ark with the cherubs sits on the rock, and only the high priest on the Day of Atonement is allowed to walk between the staves of the ark, as we said, and to offer incense. Now, the temple has a prehistory, which is that at Mount Sinai, when the Israelites encamped after the giving of the Torah, God enjoined upon them to create a portable temple called the tabernacle, which was the proto-temple. And as I showed you last time, it was assembled and disassembled. It housed a holy place and a holiest place. It was essentially a model in smaller scale of what would eventually be built on the Temple Mount. It contained, to scale, the various same elements that would exist in the two temples. That is, an outer hall, an inner hall with an incense altar, a candelabrum or menorah, a table with bread on it, a curtain, and then the ark and various other objects in the holiest place. You can see in Moshe Levine's model, right? And each of the objects, the menorah, the incense altar, right? The portable in the tabernacle, the portable sacrifice altar, the bread table, how they were laid out from the top in the tabernacle. And the tabernacle eventually settled in the land of Israel, in a place called Shiloh, where it was made into a more permanent structure, although the roof was still covered with fabric. It is in that tabernacle at Shiloh that Eli, the high priest, sat by the door when Hannah came and recited the first recorded prayer in praying for a child, right? So it's an important location, Shiloh. Eventually, the temple was built in Jerusalem on the model of the tabernacle, right? Outer area, inner area, including the Holy of Holies and then the holy place, and then various courtyards around. Solomon planned the building with his architect Hiram, who was actually a Phoenician, so it's really a testament to the use of non-Jewish craftspeople and planners in the creation of what we come to understand to be Jewish art. Forgive these kitschy images from the Temple Institute, but they have a certain mid-20th century charm. And then the ark was brought to Jerusalem, as you can see here, on wagon, with David playing his harp and the Levites singing and dancing. Unfortunately, the cattle stumbled, and someone named Uzzah tried to right the ark, and in touching it, was struck down. This is a story about the power of the ark. When the temple was built, it was built by conscripted labor. So Israelites were conscripted, right, as in the army, to build the temple and the altar. And the Holy of Holies was a problem because you couldn't set foot on it if you were a regular priest. So they left the ceiling open and they dropped priests down in a box in order to pave the area. Solomon's temple, as I said last time, had distinctive features, including this bronze basin on the backs of these oxen and these two columns called Yachin and Boaz. And Solomon dedicated the temple in a ceremony that lasted for 8 days, and his prayer on that occasion is recorded. When the temple was destroyed by the Assyrian Babylonians, the implements of the temple made their way to Persia. And when we read in Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther, that King Ahasuerus made a big feast, right, for all of his court, it says there, Vekelim mekelim shonim, and there were diverse vessels. Every vessel was different one from another. When you read the Megillah, which is normally read in an upbeat kind of fun tone of voice, when you get to those words about the vessels, you switch to the cancellation of the Book of Lamentations to indicate that those vessels were the vessels that were stolen from the temple and were now used by the Persian king for his partying, right? So that is an important juncture, and also an explanation for what happened to all the stuff that was in the temple. The ark disappeared from the first temple; it was never seen again. The Jews in Persia, like Daniel here, had a custom of praying in the direction of the temple. And it says that Daniel opened the windows in his upper chamber and prayed toward Jerusalem. When the Jews eventually started to come back, Ezra and Nehemiah visited the ruins of the temple and commissioned its rebuilding. Even on the ruins, right, sacrifices were offered, and God accepted the sacrifices. Eventually, a second temple was built. And really, Herod's temple, seen here in various views, is actually the third temple, because Herod expanded and beautified the temple and made it large and sort of a wonder of the world in a way that it never had been before. right? Just imagine the throngs of people, the pilgrims coming up to Jerusalem at the period of the Second Temple. It was said that one who has never seen Binyan Hordus, which means Herod's building, meaning the temple in its glory, never saw a beautiful sight in their life. Never saw a beautiful sight in their life, right? So, you know, it was described as being blue and white like waves of the sea, a building of great, great, great beauty. Well, the question is this: after all the glory of the temple, what remains? What remains? Well, some artifacts. This, for instance, was found on the grounds of the Temple Mount. It seems to be a humble box that was used in one of the shops at the basis of the base of the Temple Mount to store goods or to collect money. It's now in the museum, right? It's not much, but it gives you a sense of the bustling life in those streets. We've also found, sifting through the rubble in the Temple Mount, bits of stone that by their shape and color indicate that they were part of mosaic floors. So we can reconstruct the floors of the Temple Mount. Moreover, we have examples of Herodian design. Herod's coffin, for instance, has this wonderful rosette in it that is characteristic of the Second Temple period. And friends, if you go to a little museum, which is called the Katz Museum and is at the University of Haifa, rarely visited, you can see the largest fragments of the decoration of the temple that exist, including these flowers, which you see here, just as on Herod's coffin, Herodian, from the ceilings and walls. And yes, those are swastikas as part of the design. Swastika was a symbol of power in many cultures. It's found in ancient synagogues until its debasement and use as a symbol for the National Socialists in Germany, for the Nazis. It's found in various cultures. They switch the direction, as you may know, from the Hindu swastika. But you get a sense of, from the fragments that have been found, and forgive the Alami branding here, of the beauty of the vaulting in the temple itself. Even stones that have been found in the rubble of near the Western Wall are beautifully configured, right? So you also have to imagine that these fragments were painted. Right? There's not many of them, right? They're not intact. Some of them are questionable as to whether they're from the period or slightly later, or much later Arab designs. I think these two very well may be, right? But these designs, definitely Herodian. They found fragments of Herodian design in the base of the towers that were then built on the spot during the Byzantine period. Better view of the one I showed you before. Now, those things are impressive because of their aesthetic beauty. But to me, this is one of the most interesting things they found, which is a corner of the building itself. Let me show you where in the building that went. Okay, we are talking about this corner up here of the Royal Stoa, which is the columned basilica, right? So we're talking about this corner. What I'm going to show you next is this part over here, so you can see how it continues. But this is the corner, the south east corner, that was very important because the Mishnah says that it was from that corner that the Sabbath and the new months was announced, right? The priest would go up there and the priest would have a silver trumpet. And just as today, when it's going to be Shabbat in Jerusalem, they blow a siren, you know, you might have experienced it. a silver trumpet was there, used in that corner. The priest stood right here. These stones had fallen to the ground. Now, what's remarkable is you can see a little bit here that there's an inscription. And the inscription says in beautiful Hebrew letters that are legible and clear, Lebet Hatkia Lehachariz, which means belonging to the place of the trumpet blowing. Tikia is a sound of a wind instrument. Lehachriz, to announce, and it's cut off here. And you know what it said? Shabbat v'Yom Tov, the Sabbath and the holidays. Here you can see it again. So I get chills when I see that. That's a really interesting testimony to the temple. And the other element that I find fascinating, is that you remember way back in the beginning when I showed you the diagrams of the temple, I told you that there were several overlapping areas or jurisdictions, and that there was the court of the Gentiles here, out here. Then there was a fence, the soreg that I referred to, and then there's the court of the women, which is where men and women were together, and then the place that only the priests or the high priest could go. So the court of the Gentiles was separated from the court of the women. And the Mishnah says, the Gemara said, no, actually, I think it may be in the Mishnah. I have to check it out and see that there it was written in the language of the Gentiles that it is forbidden to enter beyond this sign on pain of death. Well, folks, of the many, many panels of marble that were there that actually said that in Greek, two have been found, right? One is currently in the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem, and it says in Greek, any Gentile who enters into this place without authorization is liable for their own death by decree of the court. There's another one, a little better shape, in Constantinople, which has been filled in with red so that the inscription can be read. It is quite remarkable. So I would say that of all the things that remain that we discovered from the Temple Mount, the Herodian architectural elements, just the beautiful designs that you imagine them painted, the flowers are red, this is gilded with gold, right? The place of the blowing of the shofar, and the soreg, the boundary stones, are the most impressive. What else is on the Temple Mount? We don't know. You know, the Rock is a place that is under the jurisdiction of the Jordanian Waqf. Religiously observant Jews have various ideas about whether you can go up there or not, whether you should or should not. The majority of people don't because of a number of reasons, religious and political. But the rock itself is very impressive. And underneath the rock, accessible through this entrance, is a chamber underneath the ground. It's a place that people visited occasionally. It's called the Mosque of Suleiman. And the idea is that King Solomon went there and he would pray there. But what this area really is, and you see it in various old Arabian Nights, Orientalist type prints and paintings, this was the drainage area for the blood of the sacrifices, right? So we have that. And some people speculate that the ark is buried under here as well, but there's no evidence of that. I did manage to get a couple of photographs, and you see elements like this these little consoles are still there. There's an electric fan resting on one of them. Here's a woman davening. And here's a Muslim guy praying in front of what's called the mihrab, the niche, the prayer niche of Solomon, right? Now, in the rubble, in the garbage, at the base of the Temple Mount, most recently, there has been this find. It's a little gold bell. It has striations on it. It's about, I'd say it's about 1/2 inch big. It has a loop for attaching it by fabric, by thread to fabric. Who would have walked on the Temple Mount, would have had a garment that had bells on it? Well, the answer is easy. The high priest's garment, on the bottom of the garment, and this is a reconstruction, had bells and pomegranates. By pomegranates, we mean tassels. You know how a tassel is. It has a top and then it has stuff, threads hanging down from it. And the tassels would hit the bells and they would cause the bells to tinkle. And that way you would know when the high priest came in or out of the sanctuary. It's a, sorry. It's a very beautiful idea. And some people think that this bell is an actual bell from the clothing of the high priest in the Second Temple. Do I think so? What do I know? I'm not an archaeologist. It would be nice if it were. But it's possible that, like the ivory pomegranate, it's not an authentic thing, even though it was found in the rubble. It could have been created by somebody, secreted in the archaeologist's hands or clothes, and then dumped in there and then quote unquote discovered. We don't know, but extensive analysis is ongoing. And one day, hopefully, we'll know the parameters of authenticity and also all the other secrets of this very politically contentious, very emotionally charged place, which contains the remnants of the Temple of Jerusalem. Thank you very much. So I'm ready, Ari, to answer some questions if people have them.
Okay. Let's have people chat the questions. I see a few already.
Right.
I think it's best if you unshare the screen so we can see you.
Okay, unshare the screen. 1 second, stop share. Yes, I would like to address actually, to begin with, Cantor Schwartz's question. Are the Jewish students feeling safe at Vassar? Yes, the Jewish students are feeling safe. Chabad is using the parents of the Jewish students, getting everybody riled up about the lack of safety at this college and other colleges in order to raise funds and to claim that they are the only address for safety of Jewish students on campus. This is a lie. This is not true. Jewish students here are supported at Vassar, at least by the administration, by their professors, and by a robust Jewish community. It should be noted, however, that in the current situation, both the students who are pro-Israel and the students who are part of the Students for Justice in Palestine, both of those groups are spearheaded by Jewish students. So at Vassar, it's Jews talking to Jews. It's not like, I think we have 2 Palestinian students on campus. It's a rough ride, but we'll be having in the second Seder, we'll be having 20 students over here, thank God. And my wife teaches a course called From Anti-Judaism to Anti-Semitism, and another one called The Land of Israel Before the State of Israel. These courses are full. The discussions, by and large, are quite polite. And I've been teaching here for 30 years. And I wear yarmulke on campus all the time, and I've had no problems. I sometimes hear things I don't like, but that's part of being an adult. I hear things that I don't like, and I urge the students, if they don't hear something they don't like, to talk about it and to represent themselves as well. That's all I'll say about that. Okay.
Thank you for answering that question. Although let's go back to our topic.
Okay, it's important to
We're
say.
we're in overtime now.
It's important to say.
I know. Well, so question I saw, actually, it's a question that came up when I was preparing the follow-up notes for part 1 of the series, where you focused all entirely on the Ark of the Covenant. And you showed us some really impressive art from Jewish art, but a lot of Christian art. I could not find a website or anything that actually had a lot of the art in it to share with people other than your slides. So is there a source? Have people done research? Is there a book in this to be done that has been done so people like Rosalie, who's an artist, can see all of it in one place rather than going to find it all over the place?
You have to go and find it all over the place. It's not something that's of much interest to many people.
Well, Rosalie said it was interesting.
Right. No, I know for certainly, and it's interesting to me, obviously.
Right.
But it's something that requires a little legwork. Would it be that there was such a thing? But there is not. I am publishing a book, however, about Jewish spaces in Christian art, and one of the Jewish spaces I actually decided, Ari, on the basis of this session and the previous session, that I'm actually going to include some of that in the book. So Rosalie will be able to purchase my book eventually, and or I'll send her a copy because we love Rosalie, right?
Yeah.
And you'll be able to see it there. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you on behalf of Rosalie, who was muted. Rabbis who saw the temple and maybe who saw the ark, I mean, that must be is that in the Talmud and the Mishnah? We have like eyewitness descriptions of what they saw. And then the second question is, what about the non-Jews who saw the temple and wrote about that? Because you didn't mention
So
it.
there's not much there's not any writing by non-Jews about the temple. Josephus was a Jewish historian working for the Romans. He gives a meticulous description of the temple, which actually accords with what the Mishnah writes eventually. So there's corroboration. It's pretty clear what it looked like. We have all the dimensions and all of that. The Talmud doesn't have rabbis saying, I saw the temple, right? Sometimes they say, when I was in the temple, or a statement like, if you haven't seen Binyan Hordus, the building of Herod, you haven't seen a beautiful building in your life. But what we do have is descriptions of the avodah, of the service of the high priest on the Day of Atonement, and meticulous descriptions of all the elements of things that were in the temple. Are these eyewitness? It seems that they are. So I would say that rabbinic literature is full of reliable descriptions of the temple.
Right. Julian asks the reason for the pomegranate in the garb in our tradition in art,
Right.
perspective.
Well, if you just look at the Seder of Simanim, of auspicious symbols on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, it says we eat a pomegranate, and it says, may our zechuyot, may our merits multiply like the seeds of the pomegranate. So the pomegranate as a multi-seeded thing, love is a multi-seeded thing. Okay, as a multi-seeded thing was very popular throughout the ancient Near East as a symbol of fertility. And the Jews linked fertility of body, which was always important to Jews as a very small minority population, with fertility in terms of mitzvot. There's a legend that the pomegranate has 613 seeds, which is the number of mitzvot. I mean, you could count them. I don't think that's true, but it's an idea, right? So that the pomegranate is associated with religious fertility, physical fertility, and part of what the role of the high priest was to ensure through his service to God a good harvest, right? Abundance, symbol of abundance, really.
Good. Hilda asks about the architecture you talked about. Is Herodian architecture unique to Herod, or is it really a general style?
It's, you know what it is? It's provincial Roman. It like imitates. It's like if somebody builds a house in the Syrian neighborhood of Brooklyn and wants to make it look like Versailles. It's not really Versailles, right? But it's this sort of attempt to replicate something you think is really fancy, right? So Herod is reproducing Roman stuff, probably using Roman, architects. You can see Herodian building if you ever end up in the cave of the Machpelah in Hebron, place that's not entirely safe to go to right now, but the building is still there. The cave of the patriarchs looks very much like the temple retaining wall and building would have looked with these pilasters. What we don't have is the color. These things, these fragments that I showed you would have been in deep blues and reds and golds, like any Roman architecture.
CSP did go to Hebron when it was safe a few years ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
safe as it can be, actually. I would not suggest going right now. But I agree. It was actually very funny. Outside the wall there looks like the Western Wall.
Yes.
And people do pray.
Yeah.
Okay. When we were in Israel our last time, we also kind of snuck in legally to the Pilgrim's Road that they've been uncovering. Have you been on that yet? Because that was pretty impressive to walk
I've
that.
seen the Cardo, but they're sort of
No, no,
uncovering
the
in
Pilgrim's Road.
Pilgrim's Road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
it's
showed you
incredible.
the image of the pilgrims, so you could
Right.
see, the massive amounts of people, right, involved. No, I'd like to go there one day when I.
Amazing, amazing. So anybody who gets that chance should do it. The tabernacle, there's a question about the tabernacle, whether if you don't believe the Torah was written, that things in the Torah happened exactly as written, um, because the way the tabernacle is described with items, it'd be pretty hard to find those items in the middle of the desert, Sinai desert. Um, can you, and then, but the tabernacle has very specific instructions of how to build it. That's how you can rebuild a tabernacle, right? We have people, I think people in the Christian world have rebuilt the tabernacle and they take it for a tour, very
Right,
much.
right.
So if it's not, if it wasn't actually in the desert, where do you think it came from and how do you think it was rewritten? Why was it rewritten?
There's no evidence that it wasn't in the desert. The Bible itself says, "Vayinatzlu et Mitzrayim," and they looted Egypt when they left, and they took clay kesef and clay zahav, and they took many implements of gold and silver. So it's not unreasonable to think that there was some kind of building, a portable building in the desert. And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there might be some archaeologists who doubt that there was anything, but probably those archaeologists are few. There was something. Dolphin skins, translated dolphin skins. We don't know what this animal, the tahash, was. The rabbis say it was unicorn skins, right? In response to the idea that it's ridiculous that there would be dolphins, right, in the desert. Some people say there were dolphins in the Red Sea. There still are dolphins in the Red Sea. They got dolphin skins in that way. Who knows what they're talking about? Clearly, there was some, or clearly to me, there was some kind of portable building that lasted a long time that they brought to the land of Israel with them, and then built a more permanent building at Shiloh. But the narrative is not highly problematic if you don't assume that it was that it was exactly the way it is written. I think the very specific instructions are for two reasons. One, because the eventual building of the temple involved very specific instructions. They wanted to be clear that this was a divine directive and everything was laid out. And it gives a sort of plausibility if you discuss the instructions. Christians who reproduce the tabernacle and take it around it's very nice. You may want to go and see these things, but the end of the presentation is always that the tabernacle represents Jesus and the body of Jesus. And now that we have Jesus, we don't need the tabernacle or the temples. And it's a way of proselytizing. Yeah.
Last two things. Rosalind mentions, and I don't know if you mentioned it, just that in the book of Ezra, there's a statement that the king of Persia, when he gave the Jews the permission to go back, sent them back with the vessels from the first temple. Again, I'm not saying it historically happened, but is that in the book of Ezra, and is that part of our?
I don't remember that. I know that at the very last book of the Bible, the book of Chronicles, the king of Persia says, anyone who wants to go, the last word of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, is the last word of the word of Chronicles, which is Vaya'al. Anyone who wants to go and rebuild the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, the Lord be with him and let him go up, Vaya'al, right? It ends on this positive note. I don't recall if it says anything about the vessels, but I'm not a big Ezra Nehemiah scholar, so I'm deficient.
Check it out. So last is just a promo for next week. What's coming up next week? Vivian Berger. This whole time just to find out what's coming up next week.
Well, of
He has
course.
things to do. Her
Yes.
husband just had a birthday, things like that.
Nice. Jews, as you may know, wear clothes unless they're on a nude beach. Right. Okay, Rosalind, I believe you. I just have to look. Jews, wear clothes in general. And Jewish clothes do two things. They both assimilate Jews, like tofu in a stew, right, to everything that's going on around them, and they distinguish Jews. So I want to look at some methods of assimilating and distinguishing in the material culture of the Jewish wardrobe. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week. And sorry for going over, Ari, but this has been fun. And I'm sending much love to all of you. Hi, Mom. And enjoy Texas, Ari, and have safe journey back, you and your family.
Thank you so much, and nice seeing everybody from this part of the world, from the middle of the United States. I look forward, though, to get back to California, where it's my natural habitat.
Habitat.
I
Yes,
think
for
so.
sure.
I'll
You
fit in there.
look a little,
I fit in there a little better. I mean, Rita Rubin, she could function anywhere probably in Texas.
for sure.
Not me. I could come here for a little bit. I need to go home. Good to see
Peace.
everybody
Shalom. Bye.
soon.
Bye.